Following the riots, and subsequent escape of several dozen prisoners from the Maximum Armorized Confinement Stockade, the MAX for short, my partner and I were dispatched to round up the fugitives. George and I had been working together as Priority 7 bounty hunters for nearly a decade, and had seen a lot. But this was by far the worst event to have happened in the history of the prison, and it would be our most dangerous assignment yet. See, the thing is, our prison is not a normal one. The MAX is known for its unusual and highly volatile prison population. This isn't just the highest security prison in America, or the world we're talking about. This is the highest security prison in the entire multiverse. Now, if you're not familiar with multiverses, it's basically just a bunch of different universes stacked on top of one another, like an infinite pile of cosmic flapjacks. I'm not going to go into more detail than that, like telling you how dark matter is the maple syrup, and wormholes serve as the butter. But if you want to learn more, go watch a Marvel movie or something. If I had to sum it up quickly, it's basically referring to the fact that there are near infinite universes stacked up on top of one another. In these other realities, parallel to your own, there are things which you might call monsters in your world. I'm not trying to scare you, but some of these creatures seem to have slipped through into your plane of existence. They hopped from one cosmic pancake to the other, against all odds. And that's where George and I come in. We have the training, equipment, and expertise needed to bring these monsters back. We are equipped with a portal gun, which allows us to travel between dimensions at will, and we have the tech to keep us safe, no matter what sort of environment we step into. Fortunately for us, Earth is pretty hospitable. You don't need a lot of specialized equipment to come here. The air is breathable and the climate is temperate in most places where you humans like to live. Maybe that's why so many escapees decided to make Earth their destination of choice. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have brought that up. I know how scared you humans can get. In any event, the monsters are here now. And so are we. Hopefully we won't overstay our welcome. "We're here," George said from the driver's seat next to me, startling me awake. I dozed off somewhere a couple 100 miles back, and my brain was hazy with sleep. "Quiet little burg, isn't it?" I said, rubbing my eyes. "We sure this guy's actually here? He might have just slipped into a surgeon's office to get his chip removed." "If that's the case, we'll question the doctor. Or what's left of him." I nodded. All standard procedures. But we had to talk about something. "Wonder if there's someplace to get a coffee in this shithole," I muttered, yawning. For the record, coffee is by far the best invention you people have ever come up with. Don't let anyone try to tell you it was the microchip or the printing press or internal combustion engines. Coffee is your ticket to multiversal fame. XGF 7624 has something similar, but it tastes like battery acid and gives you the shakes for days after consumption. Something about Earth's climate and environment makes it just right for growing your delightful little coffee beans, with just the right amount of bitterness. And you can't find that shit anywhere else. "I doubt it," said George. "A little hole in the wall like this Hollow's End probably doesn't even have a Burger King, let alone a Starbucks." "What kind of name is that anyways? Hollow's End?" "It's a creepy name, that's what kind of name it is. And I get the feeling headquarters knows more about this place than they're telling us. Those bastards in research are always so damn secretive about everything as it is. When I mentioned the name of this town, they all shut up even faster than usual. Said it was on a need-to-know basis. As if being sent here on a damn mission didn't qualify. Let's just get in and get the hell out of here as fast as possible. Dead or alive, they said, and I'm leaning more towards dead. Simpler that way." "What the hell happened to this place?" George muttered as we entered the town proper. Buildings had collapsed, and some had been burnt to the ground. Bloodstains painted the streets a ruddy red color in places, and it looked as if a war had recently been fought inside of the town. "Craven?" I asked, not really believing it myself. "Couldn't have been. Even he isn't capable of something like this. And those bloodstains aren't fresh. They're at least a couple days old. He hasn't been out of the max for that long." True. But it begs the question. If Craven isn't capable of doing this, what is? The tracking beacon led us to a quaint little barber shop of all places. The storefront had a very plain and simple wooden sign out front which read, "Clovis Wolfe, Barber." A barber's pole spun lazily, hypnotically, a twisting blue and red candy cane. We left the car parked out front and went into the shop. Inside, there was an old-fashioned barber's chair facing a mirror. Atop the mirror's ledge were the standard arrangement of combs, scissors, straight razors, and a tall jar of murky blue barbicide. Besides that, the room was mostly empty, aside from a chair near the window and a stand with a cash register atop it. A man wearing a white barber's apron came in from the back room, sharpening a straight razor against a leather strop.
"Morning, gentlemen. Were you in need of a cut or a shave?"
His smile was a bit unsettling, the wide grin not touching his brown eyes. I noticed when I looked at them that he was staring at us a little too intently, as if not really expecting us to accept his offer. For a split second, I wondered what he planned to do with that blade if we did say yes to a shave. Would he slit our throats, bathing in the blood and licking up the drops like rain as the arterial spray erupted into the air, laughing and dancing and swinging the straight razor like a conductor's baton? I shook away the gruesome mental image, but it persisted anyways. I'd seen too much shit, and sometimes the flashbacks made their way into my mind at the worst possible moments. "No cut. No shave," I said, a little too forcefully, recalling the butcher barber of Heath Street in dimension TZK8422. This only made him smile wider.
"Well, if not that, what else can I do for you? This is a barber shop, after all."
My partner took the lead since I found myself suddenly incapable of speech.
"We're looking for a friend of ours. He said he lived around here, but when you believe it, the crazy son of a bitch forgot to tell us his address. He's pretty particular about getting his hair cut once a week, so we thought maybe you'd seen him."
George was always so good with these quick lies, blending just the right mix of truth and fiction, so that it concealed the actual reason for our presence, while still getting us what we needed.
"What's your friend's name?"
the barber asked amicably. "He goes by Craven," I said, pulling out a picture. If the barber had seen the man, he was a great liar, because he kept that same steady smile on his face and shook his head.
"Nobody looking like that's come in here," he said. "Think I'd remember a name like that one, too. Huh, that's a strange one. Craven, you say?"
"Yeah."
"Weird name, no offense."
"None taken. Not like it's my name. I think he'd take offense, though, so might want to keep that to yourself if you do run into him."
"Is that right?"
"Yeah."
"He a dangerous guy, your friend? Should we be worried about him being in town? We are a bit particular about outsiders around here. Again, no offense to you folks. Bad experiences in the past, that's all it is."
I thought about this for a second, then looked at George. He gave me the slightest of nods, imperceptible to anyone but me. "Yeah, he's dangerous, if you get on his bad side. Listen, I'll level with you. Clovis, is it?"
"That's right."
"We're not his friends. We're bounty hunters. Sorry for being dishonest with you, but you never know in our line of work when someone might be protecting your mark. But I get the feeling you're not doing that."
"I managed to piece that together myself, gentlemen. No offense, but you got the words bounty hunter written all over your faces. Not to mention the hardware you're carrying."
He set down the straight razor he'd been sharpening and crossed his arms over his broad chest.
"So now that we got that out of the way, what can I do for you, gentlemen? And keep in mind, I got bills to pay. And haircuts don't make a millionaire."
I sighed and brought out a wad of bills, then threw them onto the barber chair in front of the man. He picked them up and began to count them.
"Impressive. For bounty hunters. This guy must be worth a pretty penny."
"He is. Which should give you an idea of how dangerous he is."
"Fellow came by here yesterday. Didn't say his name, but he didn't have to for me to know he was your man. Wasn't looking for a haircut. He's looking for help with an injury. A bullet wound."
George and I looked at each other meaningfully. We were pretty sure one of us had gotten him with a bullet, and we had $20 riding on who it was.
"You see, gentlemen, I'm not just a barber. Small town like this, back before we had a medical center, everybody came to the local barber for their injuries, their ailments. My dad, his dad before him. We took care of the people in this town. Still do, for those who like an old-fashioned healing touch. Or those who don't have adequate health insurance.
Did you get the slug out of him?
I did. 45 caliber. Big, ugly son of a bitch.
I winced. George smiled in triumph. He'd brought a Colt Double Eagle back with him on a previous trip to Earth. The big bastard loved that gun more than his own children. The barber looked at me, confused.
Why is your friend smiling about this guy getting shot? He whispered. It's creepy.
Never mind, George interrupted. Did he ask for anything else to be surgically removed?
Weird question. But yes, as a matter of fact, he did.
The man rummaged in a nearby drawer and pulled out a microchip, stained red with blood.
Does this belong to you, gentlemen?
Once we were back in our car, I put the keys in the ignition and started the engine.
George teased. Not so fast. Nice try, buddy boy. Hand over the $20.
I took out the bill, crumpled it up, and tossed it against his forehead.
Sore loser.
You got a frickin' laser scope. It's practically cheating.
Come on, let's go to that diner the guy told us about. I'll buy you a grande mocha java to make it up to you, you big baby.
So? You think he's telling the truth? I asked, once we were sitting down and drinking our warm, caffeinated beverages. We'd managed to find the small diner downtown after hounding Clovis about it, telling him we were starving. He seemed intent on getting us out of town after telling us a story, but we were going to disappoint him on that front. We wouldn't be gone until we found Craven, or a new lead that took us out of Hollow's End.
I have no idea, George admitted. Usually I can read people like him. Small town nobody like that? Man, that weird smile on his face the whole time threw me for a loop.
Seems logical he's telling some version of what really happened. Even if he's lying, parts of it are true. How else would he have that microchip? George was processing everything. I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to make sense of it all.
Something's off. Doesn't add up. That barber's lying about something, man, I'm telling you. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna find out.
Don't you go fucking commando on me again, George, I swear. The coffee shop owner interrupted us with a clearing of his throat, and I immediately realized what the conversation he just walked in on had sounded like. More coffee, gentlemen? He asked, holding up a full steaming pot. Just made it fresh. I'd love some, I admitted, and he topped off my mug.
Fill her up,
George said, smiling.
Good stuff, by the way. We've been on the road, haven't had a decent cup of coffee in days.
The man smiled, nodding, but didn't say anything. He was about to walk off when I called after him. Excuse me, sir? He came back a second later. Call me Rob, he said. Could never get used to people calling me sir. Of course, Rob. Did you ever see this guy around here? I asked, pulling out the picture of Craven. We're looking for him. He might be dangerous. Word traveled fast in a small town like this. If we'd been up front with one person, it made sense for us to do it again. The last thing we wanted was to get caught in a lie and lose trust with the people in this town. No one would speak to us again if we did that. And right now, we were the rich outsiders throwing around money for tips. And that seemed to appeal to the folks who lived in Hollow's End. If nothing else, they were happy to humor us in exchange for our cash. I didn't need to be asked this time, and quickly produced a wad of bills, which I threw onto the table. Rob pocketed the cash a second after it landed. I saw him. This morning, in fact. He ordered pancakes and a double order of hash browns. Sausages on the side with a plate of eggs. Man ate like he'd been in prison for the past 10 years.
Try 20.
Rob balked at that remark. He looked surprised. What'd this fella do? Break out? The less we say about that, the better. They're trying to keep things quiet. I don't want to speak out of line. You understand. Of course. Well, if you're looking for this fella, I think you're going to have to do it outside of town. The two of us were stunned to silence for a few seconds, before George replied thoughtfully. Why's that? Said he was headed up north. Leaving town this morning, never looking back. Man seemed scared. Had bandages all over him. Plus some wounds weren't covered at all. Looked fresh. Did he say anything more about where he was headed? Did he have a car? No car. He was walking. Went straight up the road that way. The man pointed. We both downed our coffee and bolted out of there within the next 30 seconds, leaving a healthy tip for Rob, who accepted it with a wide grin. A grin which looked very similar to the one Clovis the barber had given us. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" I asked George once we were back in the car. "Not a chance." "So what the hell is he hiding?" George didn't seem to have an answer for that. Instead, he glanced around out the windows and through the windshield, his eyes cast upwards toward the faces looking down on us from all around. Citizens of Hollow's End, watching us from their homes and workplaces. Every single pair of eyes trained upon us. "Okay, I'm starting to get the creepy vibe you were talking about when we got here," I said, locking my door. "Drive, man. Let's get moving." He obliged, and we were off rolling down the road a few moments later. "So what are we doing?" I asked. "We can't take on a whole frickin' town. And something is telling me these people aren't playing around. They want us out. All of them." "We can't leave," George muttered. "Even if this whole town is conspiring against us. We need to get to the bottom of this. It's our fucking job, man." "So where does that leave us?" He thought about this, then sighed. "We're not going to solve this tonight. I say we make a stand. Show these people we're not backing down. We check into that motel near the edge of town. Remember the one we saw on the way in? We get a good night's sleep, look at this whole thing with fresh eyes in the morning." George had seniority and a lot more experience under his belt. It was pretty rare for me to argue with him, especially when it came to these big picture problems. "All right, I'm not going to argue with that," I said. "You haven't slept in a day and a half, and you're starting to look worse for wear. Lead the way, partner. I'm on guard duty." In the back of my mind, I was thinking that motels on this planet usually had televisions, and Earth TV was actually pretty decent. Maybe I could find some Family Feud or a rerun of The Office. I didn't actually care about sleeping. In fact, I wasn't sure I would be able to after my long nap in the car. But George, on the other hand, looked dead tired, and I could play lookout while he caught up on his sleep. The unwritten code of Max Bounty Hunter Partnership said one of us needed to be awake and on guard, and this time it would be me. We pulled up in front of the motel a few minutes later, finding ourselves to be the only people in the parking lot. No other cars could be seen in the small gravel lot. George went into the office and came back out a minute later, waving a key for one of the rooms. He walked over to it and I followed after him, leaving the car parked where it was, away from our room. At the time, I didn't give that decision a second thought, but later I would think about it a lot. I brought in our small bags of luggage and dropped everything on the floor just inside the door to our room. "Thanks for your help with the bags, George," I muttered. But he was already passed out, asleep on one of the beds. His snoring filled the room, with a loud, steady tree-sawing noise. I shut the door behind me and turned off the lights. Then I hit the power button on the remote control, and quickly found a channel showing Family Feud. The TV guide showed it would be playing a marathon of said show for approximately the next 14 hours. It was going to be a good night. I was startled awake around 4 a.m. The room was quiet and still, aside from George's snoring and Steve Harvey's voice. He was berating a contestant for their terrible answer, and laughing as they insisted, "It's up there, Steve! It's up there!" And their family cheered along. "Good answer! Good answer!" Standing up, I rubbed my eyes. Then I went into the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. I didn't like the fact that I'd fallen asleep. I didn't like it one bit. I was supposed to be better than that. This town was too weird, too strange and unsettling. I didn't want to let my guard down for even 1 minute. I dried my hands on the ratty old towel and went back to the living area. I switched off the light as I exited the bathroom, and when I did, I noticed the glare on the front window disappear, revealing the silhouette of a giant head. It seemed to be staring at us from outside. My heart began to beat in double time as I froze a step beyond the bathroom doorway. Looking at that shape in the window, I tried to make sense of it. 2 pointed ears, a broad neck, and what appeared to be fur. Whatever this thing was, it looked like a giant dog. Or a wolf. "George," I managed to whisper. "Psst, George." He startled awake, and I saw his hand reaching for his gun. "The window. I said, looking away from that silhouette for just a second. "Look." But by the time he did, and by the time I looked back as well, the shape was gone. As if it had never been there at all. I didn't sleep for the remainder of that night, but George was quickly back to snoring again. He believed that I had seen something, but dismissed it as just a natural occurrence. A coyote or a stray dog outside our room. But that didn't make sense to me. For one thing, that dog had been huge. Its head was the size of a manhole cover. And for another, wolves and coyotes don't disappear when you point them out to people, as if they're listening to your conversation with their keen ears. But we didn't get the time to debate it when the sun rose. A phone call woke George up from his sleep, and he managed to answer it before I did. Still, I heard the voice on the other end speaking in his ear through the tinny connection. "Found your man," they said. "He's at the sheriff's station. Come and get him." They hung up without waiting for a response. The two of us piled into the car, and George sped off from the motel, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the parking lot. I looked back to see if the wolf was still around somewhere, hiding in the shadows. But if he was, I didn't see him. After a few minutes of driving in awkward silence, my partner pulled to a stop in front of the sheriff's office, which was located downtown. He let out a deep breath, pulled his gun out from its holster, and checked it. Satisfied, he tucked it away and looked back at me. "This could be a trap," he said, and I nodded. "Probably is a trap. But it's either this or we turn around and go back to Joshua with our tails between our legs. Ask for backup." "You know I got your back. We can handle Craven. And anybody else they got in there, protecting him." "You hope." "I know." George didn't answer. He just gave me a hard look, as if to say he knew more about this world than I did. And he was right. He'd been here a lot more than me, and he was technically my senior, even if we worked equally as partners most of the time. "We got this, man. He's probably sitting there in handcuffs courtesy of the local sheriff. We just need to pick him up, take him back to the max. I'll bet you're making this into more than it is." Instead of arguing, George took out my crumpled $20 bill from our earlier bet. "Double or nothing?" I tried to grab it, but he pulled it back, waiting for me to agree. He stuck out his other hand, and I shook it. "Deal. Double or nothing. I'm telling you, man, everything's going to be just fine." We walked up the wooden steps outside and entered the sheriff's office. Inside was a single jail cell that reminded me of something from an old Western movie, and a pair of ancient wooden desks. There was also a standing desk near the front where someone might have worked on occasion, doing clerical work perhaps, but there was no one there currently. In fact, the entire place looked empty. At least, for a moment it was. Then someone came down the stairs at the back of the bullpen and began to approach us. The man looked to be the deputy, judging by the patch on his uniform, which identified him as such. He was slightly disheveled, and his hair looked like it hadn't seen a comb in several years. "Hey folks, what can I do for you?" he asked in a friendly southern accent. "Deputy Randy Burton at your service." George produced the picture of Craven and showed it to him. "We're hoping you can help us, sir. We're working with a bail bondsman out of Tallahassee, and we're looking for this gentleman. We were told he was here." Deputy Randy took the photo and examined it carefully. "Now, he does look familiar. I think this fella came by Vault 77 the other night. That's one of the bars downtown. Fella owns the place, real nice. Just calls himself the Vault 77 citizen. You can check with him. But I'm pretty sure this guy would have left town by now." "Why's that?" "Well, he got into a scrap with somebody at the bar that night. I think he was trying to talk to somebody's girlfriend, and they took offense. He got beat up pretty bad." I couldn't help but scoff at this, and George shot daggers at me. "Something funny about that back there?" Deputy Randy asked. "You sure are quiet. You two partners? How come this guy's the one doing all the talking?" "He's the muscle," George replied, covering for me quickly. "He doesn't need to talk." "Right," Randy chuckled. "I just find it a little bit surprising that this guy got his ass kicked by some rando at the bar," I said, ignoring George's continued looks of anger. "He's not exactly your typical—" My partner's elbow caught me square in the gut, and I felt the wind get briefly knocked out of me. That was one way to shut me up. You'd be amazed how many tough customers there are in this town, Randy said, grinning. I could hardly believe it myself when I first came here. But you get used to it. Something seemed to click in my partner's mind. I saw his face change suddenly, the old bravado gone. George began to back away, and I followed his lead. Thanks for your time. We'll be on our way, George said, and I think I heard a slight quiver in his voice. We both turned to face the door and watched in horror as the lock spun shut before our eyes, sealing us in. The deadbolt closed and the chain lashed into place as if by an invisible hand. The two of us turned back to face the deputy. His eyes were now blazing with a faint orange light. You shouldn't have come here, he said. You should have left when you had the chance. We all pulled out our guns, and a shoot-off would have likely followed that would have left most of us, if not all of us, dead. But instead, there was a loud bang from above us, and I was thrown backwards by a blast, which thundered from the ceiling in front of us, sending drywall and fuzzy pink insulation shrapnel everywhere. A moment later, two people dressed in police uniforms tumbled out from the hole in the ceiling, landing hard on the floor in front of us. They stood up and immediately began bickering with each other, not able to see the Mexican standoff happening all around them through the settling dust haze. I told you that was too much gunpowder. You almost got me killed. Again. Well, at least I did something. We'd still be up in that room waiting to be murdered if I hadn't rescued us. Again. When have you ever? The taller of the two men stopped speaking. As the dust settled and he saw the guns and standoff they were now standing in the middle of, I saw a sheriff badge on his chest and realized then who he was. Oh, hi, people with guns. Please don't shoot us. Then the two of them turned and saw the other deputy, and I realized that the two deputies looked exactly alike. Craven, George said, just as I was about to. You must have tied them up and taken on the deputy's form. Yes, that's exactly what happened, the deputy nearest us said, getting behind us. Shoot that guy, quick! But before we could, Craven was on the move. The sound of guns firing filled the room, but each bullet missed its mark. Craven was extremely fast, and now that he had been discovered, he wasn't trying to hide it anymore. He was behind us in less than 2 seconds, before we even realized what was happening. He and the other deputy began fighting with each other, spinning around and grappling as they each tried to gain an advantage. They appeared evenly matched, despite Craven's abilities, and I began to suspect that the real Randy had a few abilities of his own. Unfortunately, the longer this went on for, the less sure I was of which deputy was which, especially since the gun Craven was holding went flying at some point, slapped out of his hands by Randy's forearm. Can you tell them apart? I heard George ask from behind me, but I was too focused to answer. I felt like I was watching the most important game of three-card Monty ever played. The two of them wrestled back and forth as I tried to keep track of the real deputy. But it wasn't easy. The sheriff came over to stand next to me and whispered in my ear. I can't tell which is which, he said, sounding terrified. How are we supposed to know which one is the real? Finally, one of the deputies managed to get his forearm under the other's neck and began to choke him out. It was at that moment that I realized I had completely lost track of who was who. Randy's face began turning a shade of pink, then red, then purple as he lost the ability to breathe. We gotta stop him, I yelled. He's gonna kill him. The three of us pulled them apart and managed to get them into handcuffs. The real Craven would have been able to fight us off, but he was putting on a good show, trying to convince us he was merely human. In the end, we had them both sitting side by side next to each other on a pair of plain wooden chairs, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The sheriff sighed and turned to George and I, reaching out his trembling hand to shake mine. Sheriff Parsons, he said. I figure if we're going to be doing this weird sci-fi daytime television bullshit together, we should at least know each other's names. George, my partner murmured. Lenny, I said, giving him my Earth alias. He smiled a bit at that, and I figured he got the reference. Okay, boys, do you have any ideas? Kind of at a loss here. And I never thought I'd see the day where Randy could be confused with any other individual. He's pretty much one of a kind. Untie me, you heathenist slip jockeys! One of the two deputies shouted unexpectedly, fidgeting against his restraints. Okay, actually, I'm like 99% sure it's that one, Sheriff Parsons said, pointing at the one who just yelled at us. He really likes to make up words. That's a load of bullshit and you know it, you traitorous jackalope. Yeah, that's definitely him. He likes to use the wrong words out of context a lot, too. I looked at the other deputy and saw he was getting nervous, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. And another thing I noticed, his shirt had a spot of blood on it, as if a fresh wound were beneath the clothing. Marching over to him, I pulled back the collar of his shirt, revealing a bandaged surgical incision. Blood was seeping through the dressing, staining the brown deputy uniform. The shapeshifter was capable of changing his appearance enough to camouflage any superficial scrapes or cuts, but deep wounds like this one stayed. This is Craven, I said, looking him dead in the eyes. I'll bet my life on it. My mistake was immediately apparent to George, who widened his eyes in dismay. But it wouldn't be clear to me for several more hours, when I would wake up tied to a chair, with a ringing headache. Blinking my eyes, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I pulled at the ropes, which were bound behind me, but found they were tied tightly. 1 moment earlier, I had been standing in front of the 2 deputies, identifying the imposter. But then it all started to make sense. Craven was a powerful being, lightning quick, with the ability to shapeshift and even some proficiency in telekinesis. Such a combination was exceedingly rare, and Craven had reveled in his powers at a young age, turning to a life of crime when he realized what he could do, and how much he could get away with. He was an outlier in every sense of the word. His powers were a rare mutation, never before seen on his planet. His parents were otherwise normal. It made no sense to anyone in his world how he could do the things that he did. He would have committed countless unspeakable crimes if left to his own devices, and that was why he was captured by the Multiversal Law and Justice Task Force and brought to the Max. All traces of his existence were wiped from the memories of his own world, so that not even his own family remembered he was born. Some speculated he was from the lineage of a powerful being who mated with a mortal, like the Greek legends of Zeus and Hercules. Either way, he was strong enough to break out of the Max, and someone that strong could easily break out of handcuffs. The only reason he hadn't done so earlier was that he was putting on an act, pretending to be the deputy whose appearance he had copied. As soon as I figured out who he was, Craven had no reason to continue with the charade. I would later find out from George that Craven had walloped me in the back of the head with a paperweight off the sheriff's desk, which he had manipulated using his mind. Hence why I couldn't remember anything past the smug look on his face when I ID'd him. George had managed to point his gun, but that was it. Before he was likewise knocked unconscious by the paperweight, which was now flying through the air like a troublesome 10-pound insect. It did the same to the sheriff. But Craven left Randy awake, since he was already handcuffed to a chair. The rest of us woke up a while later, finding ourselves lined up side by side, handcuffed and likewise tied to uncomfortable wooden chairs. The only question was why he was keeping us alive, but I got the feeling I would find out soon enough.
You all should have left town when you had the chance,
Craven said, reclining with his feet up on the sheriff's desk. I noticed he now had the sheriff's badge pinned to his shirt. Not a uniform, but a simple plaid flannel with the sleeves rolled up. And before our eyes, his appearance changed. He no longer looked like himself or the deputy, but like the sheriff. Images of old westerns came to mind. Bandits rolling into town, picking a gunfight with the sheriff and killing him in the street. They would meander over to the body, bend over, and pick up the badge, pinning it to their own shirt instead.
I'm the sheriff in these parts now, bucko,
I imagined Craven saying next.
You better hightail it out of here if you want to live to see tomorrow.
The townsfolk in those movies never rode off into the sunset, with their tails between their legs. They fought back. They always fought back. And the good guys always won.
So, here's how I see it playing out,
Craven said, waving around the double eagle in his meaty fist. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see George seething. Nobody was allowed to play with his gun. Nobody.
I kill all 4 of you. Then I take this town for myself.
We were all stunned into silence, unsure of what to say.
But if I do that, all of a sudden I don't have 2 bounty hunters looking for me. I've got 10. And suddenly I'm not liking my odds so much anymore.
So what are you saying? You gonna let us go? I asked incredulously.
You know, believe it or not, I considered it. Microchip is out of me. There's no proof of my existence aside from the word of you two. And if I knew for a fact that the 2 of you would lie and tell them I'm dead, I might just feel comfortable letting you leave.
I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
But there's no way I can guarantee that, even if you gave me your word. Which leaves me with only one real option.
His hand shot forward and wrapped around my throat. I felt him squeezing so tightly that I worried my airway would permanently collapse. The giant fingers closed tighter and tighter, and I felt the blood vessels in my eyes burst as redness filled my vision.
And that option is to snuff you out, like a flame spreading in a forest. You need to be extinguished. There's no way I was going to do that while you were unconscious. I wanted to see the look in your eyes when you slipped away.
At that moment, I understood how insane he was. Looking into his eyes, I saw pure evil staring back at me. He was never going to spare me. All he wanted was for me to be awake and lucid while he killed me. And I could not fight back. My hands were tied tightly behind me. I saw George pulling desperately at his restraints, trying to get free. The sheriff and deputy were doing the same, to no avail. Craven began to laugh, louder and louder as I struggled for a tiny, gasping breath of air, but found nothing. Suddenly, a sound thundered through the room, and I felt that grip loosen for just a second, before it tightened vice-like once again. Through the haze of redness in my vision, I caught a glimpse of gray fur, and a huge, hulking shape. Teeth snapping and blood spraying in the air. Another shape, smaller and blue, about 5 feet tall and dashing around on 2 legs. The world turned a shade redder, and then began fading into blackness. And for the second time that day, everything went dark, and I lost consciousness. Despite all the fighting and mayhem, Craven's hand was still wrapped tightly around my throat, squeezing and squeezing, as if his last dying wish were for me to never speak again.
If I die, I'm taking you with me,
I remember him saying as I passed out. But it's entirely possible I dreamed that part. It really does sound like something a movie villain would say. When I woke up, I was laying in a barber's chair, which was reclined back so that it was nearly flat. I looked around groggily and tried to call out for George. I instantly regretted that decision, as my throat ached with pain at the slightest attempt to talk. The memories of Craven returned, and I darted my eyes around nervously. You're safe, said a voice. I looked up to see... well, I guess Dogman would be the best way to describe him. He had short blue fur and stood around 5 feet tall. I'm Puppy Dan, he said, wagging his tail. You can call me Scamp if you like. Some people do. Don't worry, Craven's been taken care of. He won't be hurting anyone ever again. Clovis came in behind him, and I saw he was carrying a bottle of water. He handed it to me, and I opened it, grateful. Drinking it down, it was cool and refreshing, and felt like heaven on my inflamed esophagus.
A bunch of us from around town were worried about Craven from the start,
the barber said after a while, knowing I couldn't speak, but I had plenty of questions.
He seemed to know about this place. Said he had relatives here. He told us he had abilities, and wasn't accepted anywhere because he was different. Some folks around here can relate to that, so we let him stay.
But then he started picking fights at Vault 77, Scamp broke in to say. I was working there that night, clearing tables. Craven started hitting on this guy Derek's girlfriend while he was playing pool. So him and his buddy Eldridgem decided to give him a stern talking to. Next thing you know, I see bodies flying. I can't do much to help, but I started barking. The 2 bouncers came in from outside. Casey Hawaii, he's a big dude. And Elder Being. You don't want to mess with Elder Being. Anyways, 2 minutes later, the fight's over and Craven's on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back, yelling uncle. Quite a story, I managed to say before Scamp began again. So that's when we all decided he needed to get the heck out of town.
And then you folks came asking about him, and we knew for sure he was bad news. Not just a fellow with a temper.
So why did you still try to protect him? I croaked, my throat burning with every word. Clovis seemed to think back to that day when we'd met. He and so many others had hinted that Craven left town. But apparently that wasn't the case.
I got a soft spot for shapeshifters,
Clovis said, rubbing the top of Scamp's head.
That's why I took in Puppy Dan. He showed up in town one day with no place to go. Just like a lot of others around here. As much as people in Hollow's End say we don't trust outsiders, sometimes we got a soft spot for them.
I thought back to the sign out front. Clovis Wolf. Barber. Suddenly, all the puzzle pieces were coming together. Shapeshifter. It was you. Outside our motel room that night. Are you a werewolf or something? And why were you there?
I was protecting you. And I still wouldn't have been quick enough if not for where you parked your car.
What?
You parked in front of a motel room door which was several rooms closer to the main office than yours. Craven came to find you when you were sleeping, but he entered the wrong room. He broke into the room your car was parked in front of, and he would have killed you. Luckily, the motel owner called me and told me what happened. I went there to protect you.
Falling asleep while on guard duty was starting to feel like more and more of a blunder. I guess it was lucky for me that there were others looking out for me. And lucky that I hadn't moved the car closer to avoid walking the extra 20 steps. My laziness threshold had nearly insisted upon it. I feel like I'm lucky to be alive, I wheezed out, and Clovis nodded.
You are. Very. But rest your voice for now. Your friend is healing in the back room. He was injured gravely as well. Craven tried to inflict maximum damage upon both of you, once he knew his demise was imminent.
But you're taking care of us, I said, my eyes feeling heavy with the weight of sleep.
Yes,
Clovis said softly, putting a blanket over me.
For years, my father and his father before him, we took care of the sick in this very room. And we still do. For those who prefer an old-fashioned healing touch.
Or those without adequate health insurance, Scamp chimed in. I drifted off to sleep again, trying to forget about everything. Our mission was complete. Craven was supposed to be brought in dead or alive. And I'd always known that dead would be better. The next day, George and I were on our feet again, and feeling well enough to return to headquarters. We piled into the car and rolled down the windows to say goodbye to our new friends. Friends. It occurred to me that I had never really used that word before. George was my partner. Joshua was my boss. I had colleagues and acquaintances, but never any real friends. They had saved our lives, and we owed them big time. See ya, Clovis. Bye, Scamp, I said out my car window. Say thanks to the sheriff and Randy for us, will ya? Clovis nodded, waving his meaty baseball mitt of a hand.
Will do. And if you're ever back in the area, be sure to stop by and say hello.
My throat tightened at that, and I felt myself suddenly incapable of speech.
Don't say a word,
George whispered under his breath.
Not a fucking word.
As the car began speeding off down the road, I let out a long sigh. Why couldn't I tell them?
You know why you couldn't tell them.
Yeah, but...
No buts, Lenny. We don't talk to civilians about our future assignments, even if it's for their own protection.
Yeah, I know. Closing my eyes, I decided to take a nap. It was going to be another long car ride.
Not so fast,
George teased.
Remember our bet?
Groaning, I began rummaging in my pocket. I pulled out another crisp $20 bill, crumpled it up, and threw it at George's forehead. That's $40 now you got off me. I hope you're happy. My partner took the bill and stuffed it into his pocket, with the rest of his winnings.
Nice. Could buy myself a Starbucks with this.
I closed my eyes again, hoping to get some sleep. It's important in this line of work to get some shut-eye when you can. You never know when you'll get to sleep next. And we're going to be on this Earth mission for a while. 1 down, 13 to go. Are you new to Holozand? Well, if you are, you may just want to check out the Holozand playlist, which will be showing up on your screen at the end of this video. Within that thing, you'll find the answers which you seek. Or maybe not. What do I know? Well, I guess one thing I do know for sure is who I want to thank for helping make this episode possible. The real-life citizens of Holozand. If you want to help support the channel and become a citizen of Holozand yourself, check out the Jordan Grupe Horror Patreon page and become a featured character, just like these fine folks. So head on over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror to see all the exclusive content and bonus videos that are over there. Or click the join button to become a channel member, and you'll get early access and bonus videos. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And if you really loved it, maybe share it with somebody else who you really want to torment. It really does help out a lot. Alright everybody, that's it for today's episode of Holozand. See you next time.